Oh, madam, if you would, you may tell her that it's Barnabas Collins.
To the Archaeology of Dark Shadows. It's been a while, my friends. I'm sorry about that. The clip that I just showed you of Barnabas' introduction to the program in 1967 is probably the most duplicated scene across all the spectrum of media that Dark Shadows has been in. What do I mean? Well, let's talk. Dan Curtis Productions made history when in 1967 Barnabas Collins was released from his coffin by a greedy and kind of dim-witted drifter named Willie Loomis. But he was a likable character. Sort of. Up to that time, Dark Shadows was interesting to be sure, but was in line for cancellation by ABC TV. And as soon as that hand raised up out of the coffin from Barnabas, the show took off and ended up staying on the air until the story ended on my birthday on April 2nd, 1971. One of the saddest birthdays I've ever had, because I tell you, didn't have a lot of friends as a kid. And it was like the characters from Dark Shadows were my buddies. I mean, I would make up stories, I'd write stories about them, and I would appear in the stories, and it was just, they were like people that I genuinely knew. Kind of crazy people, but they were, you know, that's who I had. One thing I find interesting are the various ways Barnabas Collins would present himself to the residents of Collinwood in the different time periods within the show. Also, in the various other media. My favorite introduction has to be in that original opening clip that I just showed you. On the show, Barnabas presented himself with the backstory being from the English branch of the family, long out of touch with their American cousins. Not only did it get him accepted by the family, but he is allowed to live in the old house where he's better able to keep his secret. What helped him be accepted by the family, though, was not just that story. It was a portrait hanging in the foyer of the original Barnabas, which actually was him, but nobody else knew that except Willie. So that gave him some credibility as being who he said he was. Now, the next time Barnabas needs an introduction at Collinwood is after his arrival in 1895 by use of the I Ching, and he used a story about arriving from England, but is not so well accepted at first by the family, even though the portrait's hanging in the foyer. Quentin Collins threatens to run him through with a sword during their introduction period. He was quick to resolve that, but yeah, he was ready to put a sword blade through him. But then again, on TV, Barnabas Collins needs yet another introduction after entering the mysterious world of parallel time. Parallel time, as well as the Leviathan storyline, are two storylines that almost killed the Dark Shadows. Most people didn't care for the Leviathan storyline. I enjoyed it. Most people didn't care for the first parallel time storyline. I liked it. I found it really rather interesting, the concept of there being these other bands of time where you could live, but they almost killed the show. But Carolyn Loomis is the first to meet him, and Barnabas puts the bite on her shortly after their introduction, and voila, he has a helper under his control. However, that didn't help him a whole lot in parallel time, because even though Willie still seemed like a bit of a dolt, he was an established writer, and he had plans for Barnabas. So, it ended up with Barnabas being chained in the coffin there in parallel time. He actually tells William, and he goes by instead of Willie, the truth of where he is from and what exactly he is. And William plans to use him to write another book. His first book was called The Life and Times of The Life and Death of Barnabas Collins, because in parallel time, the original Barnabas died back in the 1790s. He got to live out his life without the witch Angelique coming in and really screwing things up. Well, she didn't do it all by herself, though. He had to get involved with her, or she wouldn't have been so vindictive. So it was Barnabas' fault too, right? But the same backstory was used also in the 1971 movie House of Dark Shadows. He needed another introduction. And as I said, the same backstory was used in the 1971 movie House of Dark Shadows and in the 1991 NBC reboot of the TV series Dark Shadows. It's interesting to note, though, as Dan Curtis and staff were doing the film House of Dark Shadows, the characters that were in the movie had to be written out of the TV show, or their parts filmed first out of sequence. So Barnabas was gone during the entire filming, and that hurt the show dramatically. Quentin was a good character. He wasn't a strong enough character to carry the show, and certainly he was a total wuss in parallel time, in my opinion. And then, but at any rate, Quentin's not the subject of the video. The introduction of Barnabas is. Now, in 2012, the great destroyer of legends, Johnny Depp, who ruined The Lone Ranger, the Dark Shadows movie starring Johnny Depp, and I'm sorry for putting it this way, is that it's the bastard child of Dan Curtis, because I've never been able to watch it long enough to see how this Barnabas was introduced to the family. I've seen clips of it and consider it a fiasco unworthy of Dan Curtis and unworthy of the Dark Shadows title. Stupid diversion timeline that stalwart fans condemn, because you'd have to look at it as another Band of Time, because very little matches up with the original series. But one thing that always matches up, and I think has been a debit to Dark Shadows over the years, is that it always went back to beginning with Barnabas and that same backstory about him. Now, people often of my age wondered, why did Dark Shadows not take off with a fan base like Star Trek did? Well, certainly Dark Shadows has a very active fan base, but they never got behind it like the fans did behind Star Trek. Fans go on YouTube and they produce wonderful fan Star Trek videos that are as good as anything that were put out by Paramount. But if you look on Dark Shadows, there's no fan-produced videos there, fiction videos, continuing on the story from a fan basis. There are none there. I've looked, and it would be nice to see some of those there. But anyways, the fan base did not guess that the creators of Star Trek did. Now, Dan Ross, writing under the name of Marilyn Ross, penned over 30 Dark Shadows novels for paperback books. And there are so many different divergent timelines in those 30 plus books. Very few of them make sense unless you set them in a parallel universe. But I like the stories. They're more gothic romances, really, in a sense. But they were good books because they were Dark Shadows. Now, rather than being confined to his coffin for around 200 years in the book series, he was actually living dead in London and other localities around the world. And this Barnabas in Ross's universe had all that time and experienced a lot of adventures, which thus gave rise to 30-some books. In The Secret of Barnabas Collins, 7th in the Marilyn Ross paperback series, Ross wrote of Barnabas' arrival at Collinwood. And I want to read to you a couple quotes from that. Ross wrote, "From the moment on a bleak April night when Victoria Winters had opened the front door of Collinwood to find herself confronted with a tall, handsome stranger in a caped coat, she had been under the spell of Barnabas Collins' charm. He stood there briefly silhouetted against the cloudy sky, and then he vowed in a courtly manner. 'I have come to see my cousin Elizabeth Stoddard,' he said, in a deep, rich voice with a pleasant English accent. 'I trust she is at home.' 'Please come in,' Victoria had invited him. 'Who shall I tell Mrs. Stoddard is calling?' Leaning on his silver-head woolshead cane he carried, he told her with a smile, 'Say it is her cousin, Barnabas Collins, from England. I'm sure she is familiar with our branch of the family. My father and grandfather were here before me.' But they were all the same man. His father and grandfather were the same man. They were him. Different points in time. So I kind of like the thought of him having been around all those 200 years. Although there's an attraction to his being chained for 200 years too. I don't know. It's interesting. But I think it was a debit to the series in its various incarnations to just fall back on this. It might have been interesting to see at some point a book or a program or a video that started with, say, Laura Collins, who was the Phoenix, who I covered in another Dark Shadows archaeology video, or Quentin. But they always went back to Barnabas because they had such success with him in the original TV show that they were hoping to capitalize on that success. And it just, I'm sorry, but after time it gets a little bit tedious. I'd like to see them do something different. I read recently that Dan Curtis's daughter is, there was a new program being planned, a new Dark Shadows program being planned. So I have to look and see if I can find more information on that. And she would be an integral part of the production process of that Dark Shadows, if indeed it comes about. So, but the book, by the way, Secret of Barnabas Collins, was released in 1969, and 69. But it has Barnabas's arrival set in 1968, whereas on TV he arrived in 1967 after being released from that chained coffin. Now, there's one other introduction that I'd like to look at here. See, in March 1971, the Dark Shadows comic strip debuted in many newspapers, and the storylines were, like the Ross ones, vastly different from the show, as well as the cast of characters. Now, but that's not bad. There were some really good stories that we're going to look at here, not today, but we're going to look here, that were in that comic strip series. I thought it was really quite excellent. But anyways, the first daily strip was a Sunday color comic, and Barnabas's arrival still involves England, but we are really left with very, very few details. Not much was said. Here's this mysterious figure walking up the lane or drive to Collinwood, and no story as to how he got there. Was he released from his coffin? Was he actually there from England? Had he lived all those years like he had in the Dan Ross book, or the Marilyn Ross books? Dan Ross is his real name. So we're not told the details of that. Now the first panel, richly atmospheric, and I tell you what, K. Bruce, Ken Bald, who did the artwork on this strip, is amazing. His work was spot on in reproducing the likeness of Barnabas Collins. Spot on. But anyways, Barnabas in that first panel is silhouetted against the night sky with Collinwood in the distance, and the panel reads, "Midnight. A mysterious figure stalks towards an old stone mansion which looms in bleak splendor on the windswept coast of New England." The second panel features Elizabeth and Carolyn Stoddard, and it reads, "Collinwood, ancestral home of the New England branch of the Collins family. The widowed Elizabeth Stoddard senses a strange presence, and in fact she admits to Carolyn that she is terrified and knows not why." So Barnabas must have been sending out bad vibes from walking up that road, because Elizabeth was feeling something wasn't just right. Now in the third panel, Carolyn opens the front door to find Barnabas, and he explains, "I trust I didn't startle you. My name is Barnabas Collins, your cousin. From where? Not France, not Siberia, not anywhere else, but England." No imagination. Anyways, the remainder of the first strip explains about his vampire curse, and it also, like the TV show, had Barnabas falsely claimed that he was working on a Collins family history, while in fact he was asleep during the day in his coffin. And in the comic strip series, rather than being allowed to live in the old house on the estate, he was living in a stone cottage on the estate. So it's interesting, though, the different presentations of Barnabas into the storyline, but I have to say they could have used a little more imagination in that. I don't know about the big finished production audio versions of Dark Shadows. I hope to start listening to some of those soon, and I'll let you know what's going on there. Thank you for stopping by. Thank you for listening to me prattle on about one of my favorite subjects, Dark Shadows. Hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a comment, subscribe, thumbs up would be nice, people. And I love you all very much. God bless you, and I'll see you soon, real soon, God willing.